Captain Sarah Chen had seen enough alien architecture to know when something was trying too hard to impress. The massive space station looming before her ship, the Laughing Gull, looked like someone had taken a cathedral, crossed it with a fortress, and, then, covered the whole thing in enough gold plating to bankrupt a small planet. Spires twisted impossibly upward, defying physics in ways that screamed, "We have technology you don't understand." Crystalline structures pulsed with ethereal light, and the entire thing was easily 50 times larger than Earth's biggest space stations. "Well, would you look at that," muttered Commander Jake Rodriguez from the pilot's seat. "Someone's compensating for something." Sarah tried not to smile. The Terran Confederation had prepared her crew for this moment for months. First contact with the Galactic Empire was supposed to be dignified, respectful, and, above all, appropriately humble. Earth's representatives were expected to show proper deference to a civilization that had mastered faster-than-light travel while humans were still figuring out fire. The problem was, humans had figured out quite a lot since then. "Incoming transmission, Captain," reported Lieutenant Maria Santos from Communications. "They're broadcasting on 17 different frequencies simultaneously. Audio, visual, quantum entanglement channels, something that might be telepathic, and a few others I can't even identify." "Put it on main screen, audio only for now," Sarah ordered. The bridge filled with a voice that seemed designed by committee to sound as imposing as possible. Deep, resonant, with harmonics that suggested the speaker was either very large or had some serious audio enhancement going on. "Primitive vessel of the species known as human, you have entered the sovereign territory of the Galactic Empire. You will follow our guidance speak into docking base 7400N-12, where you will be processed according to Imperial Protocol Fate 9 for newly discovered pre-warp civilizations." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Pre-warp? Did they miss the part where we traveled here faster than light?" "I am Supreme Administrator ZYX Thala of the Imperial Integration Department," the voice continued. "Your species will be evaluated for potential inclusion into the Empire as a client race, subject to the usual restrictions and obligations. Prepare for inspection and cataloging." Sarah looked around her bridge. Her crew was trying very hard to maintain professional expressions, but she could see the corners of mouths twitching. The Terran Confederation Navy had dealt with enough bureaucratic nonsense over the years that this felt almost nostalgic. "Lieutenant Santos, open a channel." "Channel open, Captain. This is Captain Sarah Chen of the Terran Confederation ship Laughing Gull. We appreciate your enthusiastic welcome, Supreme Administrator. However, I should clarify a few things. First, we're not pre-warp. We traveled here using our own FTL technology. Second, we're not here for integration or cataloging. We're here for first contact and potential diplomatic relations between equals." There was a pause. Then, the voice came back, sounding slightly less confident. "Impossible. Our records indicate your species only achieved spaceflight within your own solar system mere decades ago. You could not possibly have developed FTL capabilities so quickly." "Records can be wrong," Sarah replied cheerfully. "Would you like me to demonstrate our FTL capabilities? I could jump to the other side of your system and back. Should only take a few minutes." Another pause, longer this time. Commander Rodriguez was openly grinning now. "Captain, are we really going to mess with them this early?" "Jake, they just told us we're going to be cataloged and treated as a client race. I think a little gentle correction is warranted." "Captain," interrupted Lieutenant Santos, "I'm detecting massive power buildups from the station. Looks like they're charging weapons systems. Also, I'm reading approximately 40 ships moving to intercept us from various points around the system. They were hiding behind moons and asteroid clusters." Sarah's humor faded slightly. "Combat readiness level 2. Shields up, but don't charge weapons yet. Let's not escalate unnecessarily." The Supreme Administrator's voice returned, now with an edge of authority that suggested this conversation was not going according to his script. "Unknown vessel, you will comply with Imperial directives. Any attempt to leave this system without proper authorization will be considered an act of aggression against the Galactic Empire. Our fleet has you surrounded, and your primitive technology is no match for Imperial might." "Primitive technology," muttered Chief Engineer Tommy Liu from his station. "I'd like to see their Imperial might try to track our quantum displacement drives." Sarah held up a hand for silence. This was the moment she'd been trained for, but somehow the diplomatic corps had never quite prepared her for dealing with aliens who seemed determined to treat humanity like slightly clever pets. "Supreme Administrator," she said, keeping her voice level and professional, "I think there's been a misunderstanding. We're not here to cause trouble, and we certainly don't want any conflict. But we're also not going to submit to being processed like cargo. How about we start over? I'm Captain Chen, representing the Terran Confederation. We're explorers and diplomats, and we'd like to establish peaceful relations with the Galactic Empire." "Your Terran Confederation is irrelevant," came the reply. "You are now within Imperial space, subject to Imperial law. You will dock your vessel and prepare for inspection, or we will disable your ship and take you aboard by force." The bridge fell silent for a moment. Sarah could hear the subtle hum of the ship's systems, the quiet beeping of various monitors, and what sounded like Lieutenant Santos trying very hard not to laugh. "Did he just threaten to board us?" asked Jake. "I believe he did," Sarah replied. Then, louder, "Supreme Administrator, I'm afraid that's not going to happen. We came here in peace, but we're not defenseless, and we're certainly not going to be inspected against our will. Your defiance is noted and will be included in your species file. Imperial fleet, move to capture formation. Disable but do not destroy the primitive vessel." Sarah sighed. Somehow, she'd hoped first contact would go more smoothly than this. "All right, people, looks like we're doing this the hard way. Jake, prepare for evasive maneuvers. Tommy, I want full power to shields and engines. Maria, start recording everything for the diplomatic corps. They're going to want to know exactly how first contact turned into a standoff." "Captain," said Lieutenant Santos, "should I transmit our response to their ultimatum? What did you have in mind?" Santos grinned. "How about, unknown station, this is the Terran Confederation ship Laughinggull. Your threats are noted and filed under amusing but irrelevant. We suggest you reconsider your approach before this gets embarrassing for everyone involved." Sarah found herself smiling despite the situation. "Send it." The 40 Imperial ships were closing in now, their formations precise and intimidating. Each vessel was easily twice the size of the Laughinggull, sleek and obviously designed for combat. They moved with the confidence of predators who had never met anything that could fight back effectively. "Incoming weapons fire," reported Santos. "Looks like energy beams of some kind. Not particularly powerful, but definitely meant to disable our engines. Evasive maneuvers, Jake. Let's show them what human engineering can do." The Laughinggull twisted away from the incoming fire with an agility that seemed to surprise the Imperial fleet. The ship's quantum displacement drive allowed for sudden changes in direction that violated several laws of physics that the Empire apparently still considered absolute. "Return fire?" asked Rodriguez. "Not yet. Let's see how committed they are to this capture idea." More energy beams lanced through space, and the Imperial ships began closing in with obvious confidence. Their tactics were sound, their formations professional, and their execution flawless. They moved like a military force that had never lost a battle against technologically inferior opponents. The problem was, humans weren't technologically inferior. They were just newer to the galactic community, which turned out to be a very different thing. "Captain," said Engineer Liu, "I'm reading their targeting systems. They're trying to lock onto our engine signatures, but our quantum displacement field is scrambling their sensors pretty effectively. How long can we keep this up?" "Pretty much indefinitely, unless they get lucky or try something we haven't seen before." Sarah nodded. The Terran Confederation had spent decades preparing for the possibility that first contact might not go smoothly. Human history was full of examples of what happened when technologically advanced civilizations encountered less advanced ones, and the results were rarely good for the less advanced side. The Confederation had no intention of being on the wrong end of that equation. "All right, let's give them something to think about. Jake, take us through their formation. I want to get close enough to scan their technology levels." "Through their formation, Captain? All 40 ships?" "Right through the middle. Let's see how good their coordination really is." The Laughinggull accelerated suddenly, heading directly toward the center of the Imperial fleet. The alien ships immediately began adjusting their positions to maintain the encirclement, but the human ships' erratic movement patterns were clearly giving them trouble. "Scanning now," reported Santos. "Their technology is impressive, but it's not as advanced as they seem to think. Looks like they've been using the same basic designs for centuries without much innovation. Very reliable, very proven, but not particularly cutting edge. Sarah nodded. That matched the intelligence reports the Confederation had received from long-range observations. The Galactic Empire was ancient, stable, and conservative. They had perfected their technology over millennia and saw no reason to change what worked. Humans, on the other hand, had developed their technology under the assumption that they might someday need to defend themselves against exactly this kind of situation. The result was a very different approach to engineering. "Captain," said Rodriguez, "I'm getting the feeling they're not used to their targets shooting back effectively." As if to prove his point, several of the Imperial ships nearly collided with each other as they tried to adjust their positions to track the unpredictable human vessel. Their formations were beautiful and precise, but they weren't designed for opponents who refused to follow predictable flight patterns. "This is actually kind of sad," muttered Santos. Sarah had to agree. The Imperial fleet was clearly competent and professional, but they were fighting the last war. Their tactics assumed they were dealing with opponents who would be overawed by superior numbers and would attempt to flee in a straight line. The idea that someone might actually maneuver through their formation apparently hadn't occurred to them. "Supreme Administrator," she said over the calm, "this is getting ridiculous. Call off your ships before someone gets hurt. Surrender now, and your crew will be treated with appropriate consideration for their cooperation," came the reply. Sarah looked around her bridge. Her crew was alert and professional, but she could see they were enjoying themselves. Years of training and preparation had led to this moment, and they were discovering that all their worries about being outmatched by galactic civilization might have been premature. "Jake," she said quietly, "how do you feel about showing off a little?" "I thought you'd never ask, Captain." The laughing gull suddenly vanished from where it had been weaving through the Imperial formation. For a moment, the alien sensors registered empty space, as if the human ship had simply ceased to exist. Then, it reappeared directly behind the largest Imperial cruiser, close enough that the two ships could have exchanged paint. "Quantum displacement jump complete," reported Rodriguez with obvious satisfaction. "We're now in the middle of their command formation." The Imperial ships immediately began spinning to face this new threat, their movements precise but clearly flustered. Energy weapons swiveled to track the human vessel, but the laughing gull vanished again before they could lock on. This time it materialized alongside a cluster of smaller Imperial ships, close enough that Captain Chen could see through their viewports. She waved. "Are we seriously playing tag with an entire fleet?" asked Lieutenant Santos, but she was grinning as she said it. "Not tag," Sarah replied. "We're making a point. These people seem to think we're primitive, so we're demonstrating that primitive is a relative term." The laughing gull jumped again, this time appearing directly above the massive space station. From this angle, the Imperial architecture looked even more ridiculous. Huge projecting spikes served no apparent purpose except intimidation, and the golden plating was so bright it was probably visible from the next star system. "Captain," said Chief Engineer Liu, "I'm reading massive power fluctuations from the station. They're charging something big." "Define big." "Planet killer big. Looks like some kind of focused antimatter beam. They're taking this a lot more seriously than I expected." Sarah's humor faded. This had started as a diplomatic incident with an overly bureaucratic alien government, but it was rapidly escalating into something more dangerous. "Supreme Administrator," she said over the comm, "you need to stand down your weapons immediately. We're not here to fight, but if you fire planet killer weapons at us, we're going to consider that an act of war." "You dare to threaten the Galactic Empire," came the outraged response. "Your pathetic vessel is surrounded by 40 ships and facing the full power of Imperial Station ZYX Thala. Surrender now or be destroyed. Maria, get me a priority channel to Earth Command. They need to know first contact just went completely sideways." "Channel open, Captain. Quantum entanglement link is active." "Earth Command, this is Captain Chen aboard Laughing Gull. First contact with the Galactic Empire has resulted in an immediate diplomatic crisis. They're treating us as a primitive client race and have just threatened us with weapons of mass destruction. Requesting immediate backup and authorization for full defensive measures." The response came back within seconds, the voice of Admiral Catherine Walsh clear and crisp despite the interstellar distance. "Chen, this is Walsh. Full authorization granted for all defensive measures. The rest of the first contact fleet is en route to your position. ETA 12 minutes. Try not to start a galactic war before we get there. Copy that, Admiral. We'll do our best. Sarah closed the channel and looked around her bridge. Well, people, looks like we're about to find out if all those war games and training exercises were worth anything. The massive antimatter beam from the Imperial station lanced through space toward the Laughing Gull. For a moment, it looked like the human ship would be completely vaporized by the incredible energies being directed at it. Instead, the beam seemed to bend around the ship, flowing past harmlessly like water around a stone. Deflector shields holding steady, reported Lou with professional calm. That was actually a pretty impressive weapon. Too bad they don't seem to understand how gravitational field manipulation works. The Imperial fleet opened fire simultaneously, dozens of energy weapons targeting the single human vessel. The space around the Laughing Gull lit up like a fireworks display, brilliant beams of energy converging from all directions. And accomplishing absolutely nothing. Shields are barely registering the impact, Santos reported. Their weapons are powerful, but they're designed for targets that use different defensive technologies. Sarah nodded. The Terran Confederation's defensive systems were based on relatively recent discoveries about the fundamental nature of spacetime. Instead of trying to absorb or deflect incoming energy, they manipulated local gravity to redirect attacks around the ship. It was elegant, efficient, and, apparently completely unknown to the Galactic Empire. Jake, take us back to the center of their formation. I want to get their attention. We don't have their attention already, Captain? We have their weapons pointed at us. That's different from having their attention. The Laughing Gull began moving through the Imperial fleet again, but this time it wasn't dodging. Energy beams struck the ship continuously, creating a light show that was probably visible from orbit, but the human vessel continued on its course as if the massive bombardment was nothing more than a light breeze. Supreme Administrator, Sarah said over the comm, you're embarrassing yourself. Call off your attack and let's talk like civilized beings. Impossible, came the reply, but now there was a note of panic in the alien voice. No vessel can withstand the concentrated fire of an Imperial fleet. What are you? We're humans, Sarah said simply. We're explorers, diplomats, engineers, and, yes, when necessary, we're warriors. But we'd rather be friends. The weapons fire from the Imperial fleet gradually tapered off, not from orders but from the growing realization that they were accomplishing nothing. Ship captains began reporting to their superiors that their most powerful weapons were having no effect whatsoever on the alien vessel. Captain, said Rodriguez, I'm reading massive confusion in their fleet communications. Sounds like nobody knows what to do next. That makes sense, Sarah replied. They've probably never encountered this situation before. For them, overwhelming firepower has always been enough to solve any problem. Should we try to open negotiations again? Before Sarah could answer, space around the Imperial fleet began to ripple. Reality seemed to fold in on itself, and, suddenly, the 40-ship Imperial fleet found itself facing not one human vessel, but 6. The rest of the Terran Confederation First Contact Fleet had arrived, emerging from quantum displacement jumps with the kind of precision timing that only came from years of coordinated training. This is Admiral Walsh aboard the TCS Prometheus, came a new voice over the comm. Imperial forces, you are ordered to stand down immediately and prepare for diplomatic contact under the appropriate protocols. The 6 human ships arranged themselves in a formation that managed to be both non-threatening and absolutely impossible to ignore. Each vessel was different in design, but they all shared the same underlying technology that made them effectively immune to Imperial weapons. Captain Chen, Admiral Walsh continued on a private channel, status report. First contact went badly, Admiral. They immediately assumed we were a primitive species and demanded we submit to being catalogued as a client race. When we refused, they opened fire with everything they had. Including planet-killer weapons? Including planet-killer weapons. Their technology is impressive but outdated. They're still using energy-based weapons and traditional deflector shields. Our gravitational defense systems make us effectively invulnerable to their attacks. Understood. Any casualties? None on our side. I don't think they've taken any either, but their pride is definitely wounded. Admiral Walsh's voice carried a note of amusement. Let's see if we can patch that up. All ships, assume diplomatic formation. We're going to try this first contact thing again, hopefully with better results. The human fleet rearranged itself into a pattern that was clearly non-aggressive but equally clearly demonstrated their advanced maneuvering capabilities. Each ship moved with impossible precision, executing complex patterns that showed off their technological superiority without being overtly threatening. Supreme Administrator ZYX Thala, Admiral Walsh said over the general calm, "This is Admiral Catherine Walsh of the Terran Confederation First Contact Fleet. I believe there has been a significant misunderstanding here. We'd like to start over." There was a long pause before the alien voice responded, and, when it did, the arrogant confidence was gone. "Admiral Walsh, this is unexpected. Our intelligence indicated your species was barely capable of interplanetary flight." "Intelligence can be wrong," Walsh replied diplomatically. "We'd like to invite you and your staff aboard our flagship for proper first contact negotiations. We believe there's a great deal our two civilizations could learn from each other." Another pause, longer this time. "Your vessels have proven remarkably resistant to Imperial weapons," ZYX Thala said carefully. "Perhaps we were hasty in our initial assessment." Sarah found herself smiling. The alien bureaucrat was clearly struggling to find a way to save face while acknowledging that he'd just ordered an attack on beings who could have destroyed his entire fleet if they'd chosen to fight back. "Supreme Administrator," she interjected, "there's no shame in making assumptions based on incomplete information. We've done the same thing ourselves more times than I care to count. The important thing is that nobody got hurt, and we can move forward from here." "Your generosity is noted, Captain Chen. Perhaps formal negotiations would be appropriate." Admiral Walsh took control of the conversation. "Excellent. We'll prepare suitable accommodations aboard the Prometheus. I think you'll find human hospitality quite pleasant, once we get past the unfortunate first impressions." As the communications ended and both fleets began standing down from combat readiness, Sarah looked around her bridge. Her crew was professional and alert, but she could see the satisfaction in their expressions. They just faced down the full military might of a galactic empire and come through without a scratch. "Well," said Commander Rodriguez, "that was educational." "Indeed," Sarah replied. "Looks like humanity might not be the primitive newcomer species everyone expected us to be." "Captain," said Lieutenant Santos, "are we really going to let them save face after they tried to vaporize us?" Sarah considered the question seriously. "Maria, one of the things that makes humans different from a lot of species is that we understand the value of giving people a way to back down gracefully from a bad situation. These people made a mistake, but they're willing to correct it. That's worth encouraging." Chief Engineer Lou looked up from his console. "Besides, did you see their faces when our shields didn't even notice their planet-killer beam? I think they got the message about not underestimating humanity." Sarah nodded. The first part of First Contact hadn't gone according to plan, but perhaps that was for the best. Humanity had just announced its presence on the galactic stage in a way that no one would forget anytime soon. The Galactic Empire had expected to encounter a primitive species in need of guidance and protection. Instead, they discovered that the newcomers were not only technologically sophisticated but also surprisingly difficult to intimidate. It was, Sarah reflected, probably exactly the kind of first impression humanity needed to make. Admiral Walsh materialized on the bridge of Imperial Station ZYX Thala in a shimmer of blue light, accompanied by Captain Chen and a small diplomatic team. The transporter technology was another surprise for their hosts, who had been expecting a shuttle docking. The Imperial Command Center was exactly as impressive as Sarah had expected. Soaring ceilings stretched up into crystalline formations that pulsed with soft light, and holographic displays showed fleet positions throughout the star system. Everything was designed to showcase the Empire's technological achievements and administrative efficiency. Supreme Administrator ZYX Thala turned out to be a tall, elegant being with silvery skin and, for arms, each ending in delicate hands with 6 fingers. His robes were elaborate even by the standards of his ornate station, and he moved with the careful dignity of someone who was very aware of his own importance. "Admiral Walsh," he said, his voice carrying the same resonant harmonics they'd heard over the calm but somehow more personal and direct conversation. "Welcome aboard Imperial Station ZYX Thala. I must admit, your arrival method was unexpected. Thank you for receiving us, Supreme Administrator. May I present Captain Chen, who made first contact with your people, and Ambassador Maria Santos, our diplomatic specialist." Sarah noticed that Admiral Walsh had promoted Lieutenant Santos to ambassador on the spot, probably to give her more authority in the negotiations. It was a typically human approach to bureaucracy: adapt the system to fit the situation rather than the other way around. Zyxthala gestured gracefully with two of his arms toward an area furnished with what were presumably seats, though they looked more like abstract art pieces than furniture. Please, make yourselves comfortable. I confess I am eager to learn more about your people. As they settled into the alien seating, Sarah took the opportunity to observe their surroundings more carefully. The Imperial technology was undeniably impressive, but she was beginning to notice subtle signs that suggested it might not be as advanced as it appeared. The holographic displays, while beautiful, seemed to be purely visual rather than interactive. The control interfaces appeared to require physical contact rather than responding to gesture or thought. Everything was functional and elegant, but it felt like technology that had reached a plateau centuries ago and never moved beyond it. Supreme Administrator, began Admiral Walsh, I think we should start by clearing up some misconceptions. Your people seem to have assumed that humanity is a primitive, pre-warp civilization in need of guidance. I'd like to explain why that assumption was incorrect. Zyxthala's expression was difficult to read. Alien facial structures didn't necessarily convey emotions the same way human faces did, but his body language suggested careful attention. Our records indicated your species achieved spaceflight only recently, he said. How could we have been so mistaken? Ambassador Santos leaned forward. Your records weren't wrong, exactly. Humanity did achieve interplanetary flight relatively recently by galactic standards. But our development didn't follow the same pattern as most species. How so? Sarah found herself speaking up. Most civilizations develop space travel gradually, exploring their local system for decades or centuries before attempting interstellar flight. Humans took a different approach. We developed interstellar capabilities almost immediately after achieving reliable spaceflight. Impossible, Zyxthala said automatically, then caught himself. I mean, forgive me, but our xenosociological models indicate that such rapid advancement is extremely unlikely. Your models, Admiral Walsh said gently, may not account for human psychology. We're a species that tends to assume everything we attempt might kill us, so we prepare for worst-case scenarios. When we started exploring space, we immediately began developing technology to defend ourselves against potential hostile aliens. Defend against us? Zyxthala seemed genuinely confused. The Empire brings peace and stability to the galaxy. Why would anyone need to defend against us? The three humans exchanged glances. This was the heart of the cultural misunderstanding they were facing. Supreme Administrator, said Santos carefully, humanity's history includes numerous examples of what happens when a technologically advanced civilization encounters a less advanced one. The results are rarely good for the less advanced civilization. We had no way of knowing that the Galactic Empire had different intentions. But the Empire has always protected and guided younger species. I'm sure that's true, Admiral Walsh replied diplomatically. But, from humanity's perspective, being protected and guided looks very similar to being conquered and controlled. We prefer to maintain our independence. Zyxthala was quiet for a long moment, apparently processing this information. When he spoke again, his tone was more thoughtful. You developed advanced technology specifically to avoid being dominated by us? Not by you specifically, Sarah clarified. By whoever we might encounter. We had no idea what was out here, so we prepared for everything. And your gravitational manipulation technology? Your quantum displacement drives? All of this was developed for defense? Among other things, yes. We assumed we might need to fight for our independence someday, so we made sure we could. The Supreme Administrator stood and walked to one of his holographic displays, studying what appeared to be technical readouts from the recent engagement. When he turned back to them, his posture had changed subtly. Your ships completely ignored the fire from 40 Imperial vessels, he said. Planet-killer weapons had no effect whatsoever. How many species in the galaxy possess such defensive capabilities? Honestly? We have no idea, Admiral Walsh admitted. You're the first galactic civilization we've encountered. None, Zyxthala said quietly. In 3,000 years of Imperial expansion, we have never encountered a species capable of ignoring our weapons so completely. Your defensive technology is beyond anything in our databases. The admission hung in the air for a moment. Sarah realized they were witnessing a profound shift in the alien administrator's worldview. For 3 millennia, the Galactic Empire had been the undisputed technological superpower in their region of space. Now they were facing the reality that a species they dismissed as primitive had defensive capabilities that made Imperial weapons obsolete. Supreme Administrator, Ambassador Santos said gently, "This doesn't have to change anything fundamental about the Empire. We're not here to challenge your authority or threaten your civilization. We're explorers and diplomats. We'd like to establish peaceful relations." "But, you could challenge us," ZYX Thala said. "If you chose to, your technology could make Imperial authority irrelevant throughout our territory." Admiral Walsh leaned back in the alien seating. "Could we? Possibly. Will we? That depends entirely on how we're treated. Humanity has no interest in conquest or domination. We've seen where that leads in our own history. But, we also won't accept being treated as a subject race." The Supreme Administrator returned to his seat, his forearms moving in what might have been a gesture of confusion or consideration. "This situation is unprecedented," he said finally. "The Empire has protocols for integrating primitive species, and protocols for dealing with equivalent civilizations, but no protocols for species that are technologically superior in specific areas while being newcomers to galactic civilization." "Maybe that's an opportunity," Sarah suggested. "Instead of trying to fit us into existing categories, perhaps we could work together to create something new." "New? An alliance between equals," Santos explained. "The Empire has thousands of years of experience with galactic politics, trade, and diplomacy. Humanity has advanced defensive technology and fresh perspectives. We could be valuable partners rather than subjects or threats." ZYX Thala was quiet again, apparently considering the implications. When he spoke, his voice carried a note of something that might have been excitement. "You're suggesting a mutual partnership? The Empire has never formed such an arrangement with a newly contacted species." "Then, this could be historic," Admiral Walsh said. "The first time the Galactic Empire established relations with another civilization as equals from the very beginning. There would be considerable resistance from other Imperial administrators. Many of my colleagues believe firmly in the established order." Captain Chen found herself smiling. "Supreme Administrator, let me ask you something. When your 40 ships opened fire on us and accomplished absolutely nothing, what did your colleagues think about that?" "The recordings of the engagement have been transmitted throughout the Imperial hierarchy," ZYX Thala admitted. "The reaction has been significant." "I bet it has," Sarah said. "Sometimes the best way to change people's thinking is to demonstrate that the old ways aren't working anymore." The alien administrator's posture shifted again, and Sarah got the impression that he was making some kind of internal decision. "Admiral Walsh," he said formally, "I propose that we establish a joint commission to explore the possibility of a formal alliance between the Terran Confederation and the Galactic Empire. Such an arrangement would be unprecedented, but these circumstances are also unprecedented." "I think that's an excellent idea," Walsh replied. "We'll need to consult with our respective governments, of course, but I believe both sides would benefit from such an arrangement." Santos was making notes on a device that was probably recording everything for later analysis. "What about the immediate situation? Your fleet is still at combat readiness, and our ships are maintaining defensive positions. Both fleets should stand down to normal operational status," ZYX Thala decided. "There's no threat here, only an opportunity for unprecedented cooperation." Sarah felt a wave of relief. The first contact crisis was officially over, and it looked like it might actually lead to something positive. "There is one thing I'm curious about," the Supreme Administrator said, his tone becoming almost conversational. "When my fleet opened fire on your single vessel, your crew's communications included what appeared to be expressions of amusement. Were your people actually laughing during combat?" Admiral Walsh and Captain Chen exchanged looks, and Sarah realized they'd been caught. "Supreme Administrator," she said carefully, "humans have a tendency to find humor in stressful situations. It helps us cope with danger and uncertainty." "You were laughing at the Imperial fleet?" "Not at you, exactly. More at the situation. Here we were, trying to make a good first impression, and instead we end up in a standoff with the Galactic Empire. From our perspective, it was absurd enough to be funny." ZYX stared at her for a long moment, then made a sound that might have been alien laughter. You found our most powerful weapons amusing? A little bit, yes, Sarah admitted. We'd spent years worrying about meeting hostile aliens, and, when we finally did, their attacks bounced off our shields like raindrops. It was almost anticlimactic. The Supreme Administrator made the laughing sound again, longer this time. Remarkable. Absolutely remarkable. Your species responds to overwhelming military force with amusement. Sometimes, Admiral Walsh said. Though I should point out that we also respond with appropriate seriousness when the situation requires it. We're not reckless. No, ZYX agreed, your defensive preparations demonstrate considerable foresight and planning. But, the psychological profile we're developing for humanity is unlike anything in our databases. Ambassador Santos looked up from her notes. Is that a problem? On the contrary, the alien administrator replied, it may be exactly what the galaxy needs. 3 months later, Captain Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed Joint Diplomatic Station, watching as ships from dozen different species moved through the busy traffic patterns around the facility. The station itself was a marvel of combined human and imperial engineering, featuring the elegant aesthetics of Galactic Empire architecture enhanced with human defensive technology and efficiency improvements. Penny for your thoughts, asked Commander Rodriguez, joining her at the viewport. Just thinking about how much has changed since our first encounter with ZYX fleet, Sarah replied. Did you ever imagine it would lead to this? She gestured toward the bustling activity outside. The Joint Diplomatic Station had become the most active diplomatic facility in this sector of the galaxy, with species that had never spoken to each other before coming together under the combined auspices of the Terran Confederation and the Galactic Empire. Honestly? I thought we were going to end up fighting a war, Jake admitted. When they opened fire with those planet killers, I figured we were about to become the shortest-lived first contact mission in history. Through the viewport, they could see a Zephyrian trade convoy approaching one of the docking bays. The crystalline beings had been the first species to request mediation services from the new Human Imperial Partnership, and their successful trade negotiations with the previously hostile Corthan Alliance had convinced a dozen other civilizations to request similar assistance. Captain Chen to the diplomatic center, came Ambassador Santos's voice over the cone. We have a situation developing. Sarah and Jake exchanged glances. Over the past 3 months, situations had become their specialty. The combination of human adaptability and imperial authority had proven remarkably effective at resolving conflicts that had seemed intractable for decades. They found the diplomatic center buzzing with activity. Holographic displays showed star charts, trade routes, and what appeared to be fleet movements. Ambassador Santos was deep in conversation with Supreme Administrator ZYX, who had become the Empire's chief liaison for what was now being called the Human Initiative. What's the situation? Sarah asked. The Draconian hegemony has finally responded to our invitation to join the expanded alliance, Santos explained. They're sending a delegation, but they're coming with a full battle fleet. ZYX forearms moved in the gesture that humans had learned indicated serious concern. The Draconians have been the Empire's primary rivals for over 500 years. They've never agreed to diplomatic contact under any circumstances. How big a battle fleet are we talking about? Jake asked. 200 ships, Santos replied. Their entire first strike force. They're not exactly being subtle about their intentions. Sarah studied the tactical display. The Draconian fleet was indeed impressive, easily the largest concentration of military power anyone had brought to the diplomatic station. Their ships were sleek and predatory-looking, clearly designed for combat rather than exploration or trade. When will they arrive? She asked. 6 hours, ZYX replied. The Empire's protocol would be to meet them with equal force, but that would mean abandoning the diplomatic mission entirely. What do we know about Draconian culture? Sarah asked Santos. They're warriors above all else. Honor, strength, and military prowess are the cornerstones of their society. They've maintained their independence from the Empire through superior military technology and an absolute refusal to show weakness. Sarah nodded slowly. And now they're coming here with their entire first strike force because... Unknown. Their message simply said they were responding to our invitation and would arrive with appropriate escort. 200 warships seems like overkill for an escort. Jake was studying the fleet composition data. "Captain, these aren't exploration ships or even standard military vessels. This is an assault formation designed for planetary bombardment. They're testing us," Sarah realized suddenly. "They want to see how the new human Imperial Alliance handles a direct military challenge." ZYX Thala's posture shifted in a way that suggested agreement. That would be consistent with draconian psychology. They prefer to establish dominance through displays of force before engaging in any other type of interaction. "So what do we do?" Santos asked. "Meet them with an equivalent force? That would require bringing in most of the Imperial Second Fleet." Sarah was quiet for a moment, thinking. The past 3 months had taught her a lot about galactic politics, but they had also reinforced her belief that human approaches to problem solving were often more effective than traditional methods. "Actually," she said slowly, "I think we should meet them exactly as we've met every other delegation that's come here." "Which is how, exactly?" "With a single ship and a sincere invitation to talk." The command center fell silent. ZYX Thala's forearms moved in what humans had learned was the alien equivalent of a double-take. "Captain Shen," he said carefully, "the Draconian First Strike Force could destroy this entire station and everything in this star system. Meeting them with a single ship would be seen as either incredible arrogance or incredible stupidity." "Or incredible confidence," Sarah replied. "Which is exactly the message we want to send." Santos was already shaking her head. "Sarah, I appreciate the gesture, but diplomacy requires that both sides survive the initial contact. The Draconians aren't known for their restraint. Ambassador, what did we learn from our first contact with the Empire?" Santos paused, obviously thinking through the implications. "That superior firepower doesn't automatically mean victory." "Exactly. And what have we learned from the past 3 months of diplomatic success?" "That confidence and competence are more impressive than overwhelming force," ZYX Thala said slowly. "You're suggesting we demonstrate those qualities to the Draconians?" "I'm suggesting we treat them exactly the same way we've treated everyone else who's come here seeking dialogue. With respect, confidence, and the assumption that reasonable people can work out their differences through conversation." Jake looked skeptical. "And if they're not reasonable people?" "Then, we defend ourselves." "But, Jake, look at what we've accomplished here. 3 months ago, half the species in this sector hadn't spoken to each other in decades. Now we have active trade agreements, joint scientific projects, and cooperative security arrangements. All because we started from the assumption that everyone involved wanted to find solutions rather than create problems." ZYX Thala moved to one of his holographic displays, calling up records of recent diplomatic successes. The Zephyrian-Corthan Trade Agreement. The Avalonian Scientific Exchange Program. The Meridian Territorial Dispute Resolution. All of these seemed impossible before human mediation techniques were applied. "What exactly are human mediation techniques?" Santos asked with a slight smile. "Treating everyone like they're intelligent adults who can be reasoned with," Sarah replied. "It's amazing how often that actually works." The Supreme Administrator was quiet for several minutes, studying the incoming Draconian fleet data. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a note of decision. "Captain Chen, if you're willing to make first contact with the Draconian delegation, the Empire will support your approach. However, I must insist on one modification to your plan." "Which is?" "You won't be going alone. I'll be accompanying you as the official Imperial representative." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Supreme Administrator, with all due respect, if this goes badly, we're talking about the potential loss of one of the Empire's highest-ranking officials." "Captain, if this goes badly, we're talking about the potential failure of the most successful diplomatic initiative in galactic history. I'd rather take the risk." Jake stepped forward. "In that case, the Laughing Gull will be honored to carry both of you." "When do we leave?" "Immediately," Sarah decided. "Let's go meet the Draconian First Strike Force." 4 hours later, the Laughing Gull hung in space directly in the path of the approaching Draconian fleet. The massive formation of warships had maintained perfect formation throughout their approach, creating an intimidating display of military precision and power. "Incoming transmission," reported Lieutenant Santos from the communications station. She'd insisted on coming along, arguing that diplomatic first contact was her job regardless of the danger involved. "Put it through." The voice that filled the bridge was deep, harsh, and carried undertones of barely controlled aggression. "Unknown vessel, you are blocking the path of the draconian first strike force. Move aside immediately or be destroyed." Sarah exchanged glances with ZYX Thala, who was seated in the observer's position. The Supreme Administrator's expression was unreadable, but his posture suggested he was as nervous as everyone else on the bridge. "Draconian First Strike Force, this is Captain Sarah Chen of the Terran Confederation ship Laughing Gull. We're here to welcome your delegation to the Joint Diplomatic Station and to escort you to appropriate docking facilities." There was a pause, then the harsh voice returned with an edge of confusion. "Escort? You are a single vessel facing the entire First Strike Force. What kind of escort could you possibly provide?" "The kind that ensures your delegation receives the respect and courtesy appropriate to representatives of a great civilization," Sarah replied. "We've prepared facilities specifically for your ships and arranged accommodations that we believe will meet draconian standards." Another pause, longer this time. "You speak of respect and courtesy while blocking our path with inadequate force. This could be seen as either mockery or madness." ZYX Thala gestured for permission to speak, and Sarah nodded. "First Strike Force, this is Supreme Administrator ZYX Thala of the Galactic Empire. The single vessel you see before you represents neither mockery nor madness, but confidence. The humans have taught us that true strength is demonstrated not through overwhelming displays of force, but through the courage to approach potential adversaries with respect and open hands." "The Empire speaks of courage? The Empire that has spent 500 years hiding behind massive fleets and defensive installations?" Sarah could see that this was escalating in exactly the wrong direction. She made a quick decision. "Draconian Force Commander, may I suggest a demonstration?" "What kind of demonstration?" "Your fleet is armed with the most advanced weapons in your civilization's arsenal. Would you be willing to test them against our defenses? If our confidence is misplaced, you'll know immediately. If it's justified, perhaps we can move forward with productive discussions." The communications channel went silent. Sarah could imagine the conversations taking place aboard the draconian flagship as military commanders tried to decide whether the human captain was incredibly brave or simply insane. Finally, the harsh voice returned. "Very well, human. We will test your confidence. Prepare to demonstrate whether your words have substance behind them." The lead draconian warship opened fire with what was obviously intended as a demonstration rather than a serious attack. A single energy beam lanced across space toward the Laughing Gull, powerful enough to destroy most vessels but clearly not the full destructive capability of the alien ship. The beam struck the human ship's gravitational deflection field and curved away harmlessly, dissipating into space without causing any damage whatsoever. "Interesting," came the draconian commander's voice, now with a note of professional curiosity rather than hostility. "More power." This time, multiple ships fired simultaneously, their combined energy output creating a brilliant display that was probably visible from the diplomatic station. Once again, the attacks curved around the human vessel without effect. "Impressive defense system," the commander admitted. "Full squadron attack." 20 draconian warships opened fire simultaneously, their combined firepower sufficient to reduce a small moon to debris. The space around the Laughing Gull became a maelstrom of destructive energy that should have vaporized anything within a dozen kilometers. The human ship continued floating serenely in the center of the firestorm, completely unaffected. The weapon's fire ceased abruptly. "How?" was all the draconian commander said. "Gravitational field manipulation," Sarah replied matter-of-factly. "We redirect incoming energy around our ships rather than trying to absorb or deflect it directly. It's very effective against energy-based weapons." "And kinetic weapons?" "Those too, though the mechanism is slightly different." Another long pause. "Captain Chen, I am War Commander Thraxel of the Draconian First Strike Force. I formally request permission to dock at your diplomatic station for negotiations." Sarah smiled. "Permission granted, War Commander. Welcome to the Joint Diplomatic Station. I think you're going to find our approach to problem-solving quite interesting." As the massive draconian fleet began following the Laughing Gull toward the station, ZYX Thala turned to Sarah with something that might have been admiration in his alien features. "Captain, when you first suggested meeting them with a single ship, I thought you were taking an insane risk. And now? Now I'm beginning to understand why human diplomatic methods have been so effective." You don't just talk about confidence and strength, you demonstrate them in ways that make argument impossible. Sarah nodded, watching as the diplomatic station grew larger in the viewscreen. The facility was already bustling with representatives from more than a dozen species, all working together on projects that had seemed impossible just months before. Supreme Administrator, humans learned a long time ago that the best way to avoid a fight is to make it clear that you can't be beaten. Once everyone understands that, you can focus on finding solutions instead of worrying about who's stronger. And that approach works for diplomacy as well as warfare? It works for life, Sarah replied. The galaxy is full of intelligent species with good intentions. Sometimes they just need to be shown that there's a better way to handle their problems than shooting at each other. War Commander Thraxel's fleet had fallen into formation around the Laughing Gull, no longer an invasion force but an honor guard. Sarah had a feeling that the draconian hegemony was about to become the newest member of an alliance that was rapidly changing the political landscape of the entire galactic sector. The human response to overwhelming force had been laughter. The human response to diplomatic challenges was confidence. And both approaches, it seemed, were exactly what the galaxy had been waiting for.